Bienvenue, Joan. Comment ça va?
Ça va bien, merci, Mark.
This is pretty cool for a former Montrealer, doing an interview from Los Angeles with a friend in. Are you in Paris right now?
Yes, in Paris.
Cool, 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 cool. Well, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Very cool. Thanks for having me.
And I think it is going to be very cool to see if we can get our letters in order during this conversation. And we'll just start with that. And probably not a very good joke, but it'll lead people into thinking what we're going to be talking about. But can we start by briefly introducing yourself, and then we'll chat.
Yep, sure. So Joan Bohan, I'm originally from the LA area, but ended up transplanting myself in Paris, France. I started my career out in Los Angeles with KPMG, and I ultimately moved on to the Walt Disney Company, where I had a pretty extensive career, over 25 years in corporate finance. My most recent role was Exec Finance Director for the Retail Division, covering France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And the last few years of that role, I also had a social innovation project that I launched at the company surrounding dyslexia, empowerment. And today I'm also a fellow with the Aspen Institute, so happy to do that as well.
So tell us about family and why you're in Paris and things like that.
Yeah, so it just kind of worked out that I ended up, after having a career, I should say the very start of my career at KPMG, that I wanted to move into something else. And before moving into that next phase, I wanted to do some traveling. So I ended up moving halfway across the world, or I should say I ended up taking a trip halfway across the world and I never came back from. So I ended up landing a role at Disney and getting this fantastic job that, I felt like I was pinching myself each day. Here I am working in Europe, settled down in France, got married, had children, and, continued my career with Disney.
What a better childhood to have somebody who's an executive at Disney, right? I mean, that's awesome. Do you get the full year-round pass for the kids, especially when they were younger?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great perks of working for Disney. You get this great silver pass that allows you to go up to four with up to four people any time of the year, except for some blackout dates, of course. But yeah, they love that. I mean, working for Disney was much of a job for them as it was for me. It was like, we all work for Disney and this is part of our life. So, we definitely took advantage of those perks.
I remember when I moved to Florida from Canada, I kind of wished I had grown up as a kid there and gotten one of the jobs, as one of the characters, and be able to go to the underground whole city right there in Orlando and do that. It seemed like a great job, especially if you're in high school or college or something. But well, thanks for sharing that. Before we delve deeper into the whole business and social impact, tell us a little bit about your why, or what I like to say, why do you do what you do?
Well, I had this pretty interesting thing happen in my life a few years ago. I was kind of just moving along in my company at Disney and enjoying my job. And, at the same time, I had, my kids and my family, which were obviously a pretty important influence in my life. And it happened that about 6 years ago, there was a pretty interesting call for projects at Disney that allowed me to bring my professional life and my personal life together. And that just put me on this trajectory that I'm on today and really changed things up. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but this is really the gist of it, is that, sometimes you're able to bring all of your life together, and that'll put you on this road that's really unexpected.
So with respect to that, it's taken decades for leaders to finally realize that aligning with social impact is actually good for business. And taking into account, obviously, your personal and business experiences, you said, went from KPMG to Disney France and so on. Before all that, did you find that there was a time where you found, or you differentiated yourself, that you were one of those, if you will, leaders who care?
Well, I think, Disney is a pretty amazing company to work for. They've always had a pretty strong link with the communities. I've seen this over the years, being from Los Angeles. I mean, if you go to the parks, they've always been so attentive with those that were, disabled in wheelchairs, and making an extra special effort to make that a great place. So it was sort of ingrained working for the company that, you can actually work for a big corporation that cares. So I think that for all of us that work for Disney, we sort of have that already in us. And sometimes something else crops up to make that even greater. But I think that this has been an underlying theme that I've seen throughout my career at Disney.
Did you feel you had it before Disney though, like even younger?
Well, I think I've always had socially conscious parents and family around me to, remind me of, that the world that we live in has limited resources, and you should be mindful of this, that, and the other thing. So I do think that in my life, this was always something that was there and present. I didn't realize, though, that this was something that could be connected so nicely with business. I think that as a kid, I always thought it was a completely different stream, and, these things did not go hand in hand. But, as I learned over the years, that these can actually go really nicely together.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about bringing social innovation to business, and for all to have that opportunity. And I think you're right. We're kind of maybe never taught, or we never were taught, that you can do both. It seemed to be that they were separate. So now the exciting part. Tell us about the amazing Disney, which by the way is Dysnie, and the venture. How did it start? And in today's world, where inclusion is important, belonging is important, at least more than ever. Share about the importance from both an economic and social impact.
Yeah, so the project came up, dyslexia, empowerment, and just maybe a couple words on that is that I really was inspired to do this because I really felt that there was something missing there, in the business world, but just in terms of product and really an attitude about dyslexia. People tend to think of dyslexia as a problem and associate those that have dyslexia with the weaknesses or the challenges that they go through, which includes reading and spelling. But as I learned through all of my research around dyslexia, is that there's actually such an extraordinary side to the brain that leads to these amazing strengths. And so what I was looking for was, how can we bring this positive messaging in at the company and also come with for products for people that are not necessarily being served, the underserved. And so this project that I ended up joining in, thanks to a challenge that the company put together, what do you have out there? This was in EMEA, in our European office. What sort of projects can you come forward with that tick the box of social impact and economic value? And immediately dyslexia came to mind. My son was dyslexic, and I had already been in this subject for 5 years, and I saw the struggles, but I also saw the product opportunities. And so, having this challenge at the company was just the ultimate trigger for me to actually bring that to the workplace. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And it just, once I had that trigger, it was so obvious that this is something that Disney could do, and any company for that matter. Is like, what do we do at the company, and how could we make this more exciting for this particular population? And so, came up with product and content and community connections surrounding that. I was able to pilot the project in my markets. So my markets being France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And we got product out in French and Dutch, an amazing enriched ebook that we put together that allows users to come up with their own way of reading, but also dyslexia-friendly books for beginners, intermediate, and advanced readers that really, entail just having, in some cases, more spacing and less text on a page. So, at the end of the day, what we were doing was we were creating products for a group of people that were not getting necessarily products that were useful for them. And so it really was the perfect storm of this problem and the business world. And, Disney being a company that catered to families and children was just the ultimate place to do this.
And the name is so amazing. What's fascinating to me, there's so many people in the entertainment world and even business world that have become more open to saying they are dyslexic, and showed, certainly there were challenges, but also showed a lot of the opportunities and sometimes genius that they had because of it. Haven't you seen that?
Yeah, and this is exactly what I started to learn about at the very beginning of this whole dyslexia adventure. When my son was diagnosed, I was actually quite frightened by this, but I learned this amazing side. And it's not just that you have these great examples who are talking about their dyslexia and attributing their success to it. I mean, there are doctors and neurologists that have really looked at the brain and show that the brain works differently. And it's precisely this difference, these workings, that lead to this high creativity, this innovation, this out of the box thinking. And so that, really got me excited because I thought, oh, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And, although, like you said, I mean, when you're living in the United States, I think that with the entertainment industry, you're hearing a lot of people coming out of this part of the, this business anyway, speaking up about that. And it's important for people to speak up about it across all businesses and levels within a company. And the project, that I brought forward was about coming forward with product, obviously for customers, but I really wanted to celebrate the dyslexics internally as well. I wanted them to be proud about being dyslexic and saying, hey, yeah, me too. So-and-so is dyslexic and so am I. And by speaking about this project internally, just pitching it to the different business units, I had people come up to me afterwards saying, oh gosh, you know what? I'm dyslexic. This is really cool what you're doing. How can I help? So I thought, wow, this is so unexpected to have this type of engagement, but it's obvious, it's logical at the same time. So it really was a great way to thread diversity inclusion with the business.
Yeah, I think you're right on. We're starting to learn that really about inclusion, and it's actually so valuable. Number one, just to give people the dignity and the ability to be involved in things, but also we're all different in some ways. We all have challenges in some ways. So are we going to pick and choose who's to be excluded? But we're actually realizing there's so many positives, including just relationships with somebody different than you, that can benefit everybody. So it's as one Deloitte partner told me years ago, brilliance is simple. And it took me years to understand that even though things can be complex, the actual answer is, you end up being pretty simple. You can benefit from knowing different people, if you will. We at Fifth Element, we do a lot of work in interacting between different companies, creating what we call omni-wins for opportunities. And tell us a little bit about how you see this growing, where it's sharing of the information between organizations. It's bringing more content, more product, more customer experience because of getting rid of the stigma, if you will, of dyslexia and seeing the benefit and the value of it.
Yeah, and dyslexia, I think, is a really interesting area to start for companies because it's so prevalent. I mean, we're saying in the States that it is probably between 15 and 20% of the population.
No?
I typically just say 1 out of 10 to avoid arguments because other countries, track this differently. But let's just say, for argument's sake, it's 1 out of 10. That's huge, right? So what that means that all companies should be all over dyslexia. How can we make our products and services better for this population? And by the way, when you start looking into it, you realize that these accommodations, if you will, are actually useful to many people. Having something that's simpler and easy to read, not so many, words on a page, but also, just doing things that are just simpler. And that really has been a benefit. And that's actually the epitome of what's inclusive, right? If you do a product that takes into consideration a certain population, you're actually making it pretty interesting for many, many people as well. So I think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here for dyslexia, but I think dyslexia is the tip of the spear. I think it's the tip of the spear because, first of all, you're going to have a lot of dyslexics at a given company, so you could leverage them. But whatever you do around dyslexia, you could bring that template out to any other learning difference, any other disability, and let's back that up and take it across the whole spectrum of diversity and inclusion. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And to that point, I want to talk a little bit about well-being. My grandparents were from Kiev, and they would always say, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing. And then education was second, but health was clearly first. And there's so much going on. You have COVID, we've got racial justice, we've got wildfires in California, we've got all sorts of things going on in the world. Do you think there's been, and we've kind of talked a little bit about this, an awakening, not just for people with dyslexia, but not just talking about customers, what about all families like yourself as a mom, all families that are impacted by this too, and the stress of the whole scenario of maybe thinking something's wrong with their kid or whatnot. You think there's been an awakening of that not only is it a big marketplace, but the well-being of people in your community is impacted also by recognizing this?
Yeah, I think this whole experiment that we just lived through, the pandemic, has really put things, problems very up and center, front and center. We've seen that people and children have struggled learning remotely. And it does affect those with learning disabilities in different ways. It could be helpful or it could hurt them a lot. But what we can see is that there is a well-being problem, generally speaking, that's related to this. And, I do think that people are more aware about these things, these well-being problems. That well-being problem could also be linked to, anxiety and that is brought on because of what we're going through, and that it could be because there is a learning difference or a disability that makes it so that this remote experience wasn't that easy. So I think that definitely we are much more aware of this, and I'm hearing a lot more about neurodiversity and neurodivergent individuals, and it's coming out in an interesting and positive way. So I think the more we speak about it, the easier it is going to be for everybody, and we'll start looking at it not for just the challenges, but really like, oh, this is a completely different way of thinking. Oh, maybe we can do this. So I think there's a lot of positive vibes and hope out there for that.
Yeah, maybe the word isn't disability. Maybe the word is different way type of thing, like you just said. Who's to say that that's a disability in the first place? It's just an opinion that's what it is. So I think that's brilliant. Last question on this part then. We obviously like talking about leaders who care. What role do you see business leaders who care have to ensure that their employees' well-being in terms of financial, physical, and mental well-being is addressed and taken care of?
Well, I think, leaders have a great role to play. It really does start from the top. Once a leader does something in that area, it gives everybody else permission to kind of jump on and make those things happen. So it is super important for leaders to come forward with these types of things. I think there is a lot of low-hanging fruit to make things easier. And they can do quite a bit. And it's not about reinventing the wheel in a lot of cases. I think that there's so much to harness in a given company by valuing difference and diversity, bringing those voices to the table. I mean, and truly, that will lead to great products and experiences. And, the experience that I went through with my project was through an entrepreneur challenge. And I was fascinated by the group of people that actually came forward on that. I mean, there were people that were coming forward because there was some sort of problem that they were addressing, just like me. And they were coming forward with solutions for a particular population, just like me. And had we not had that challenge that brought those two things together, I don't know if we would have ever come forward to bring, we would have ever dared bring our personal life into our business. So that was just a great experience for me. And it just got me thinking that if leaders actually had that type of a challenge internally, they would be able to shake the trees and bring these great ideas forward. And it really would be a virtuous circle. They would be valuing everybody. It would lead to better well-being. It would lead to better ideas in the company. Everybody would be thriving.
It's funny, and this is a whole other conversation. It's funny you said, bringing personal challenges, issues, or whatever into business and vice versa. Isn't that really what business is about? Is solving problems and pain that's out there? So it all comes together anyway. That is, at least it's supposed to. Last quick thing, with everything that happened in 2020 and hopefully easing off in 2021, what are you most grateful for?
Well, I think it's very basic, and it's kind of like what you just said earlier about your grandparents and as long as you have your health. I mean, it's never been so important, right? I think we take our health for granted, even if, obviously there are diseases that could pop up, but who would have thought that we would have gone through this whole pandemic thing, and that people that seemingly healthy could actually really be impacted quite severely by that. So I'm really grateful that my family, weathered this okay, and that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for first of all creating Disney. I think it's a fantastic thing, and for sharing and not only putting the letters in the right place, but putting our mindset in the right place. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Love talking about it.